all of which have passed through the consciousness of individuals just the same as you and I, be they historic or be they present now. This is our shared experience. To quote the famous quote around Schindler there, he who changes one life changes the world entire. If we begin to change the prakriti, the prima materia of reality, consciousness itself, we can of course adapt and evolve systems. They will have to reflect those changes in reality. Even you are talking about a shared hysteria when it comes to the phenomena of Donald Trump. Oh, in spite of all this, he didn't do a peaceful transition. Yet somehow he reaches deep down into the spiritual cojones of pretty near 50% of Americans, and they don't give a shit. Now, if we can't find a way of hacking, bypassing this constant conflagration, we are doomed. Otherwise, what is it? 50% are going to subjugate the other 50%? Is that the solution? Not going to happen, is it? We're going to have civil war? Are we ever going to have an election in your country again that doesn't end with the other side going, oh, it was Russiagate, oh, it was stolen? That's just the deal now. So we have to find something else. Where else is it going to come from? This is a time to revivify the spiritual traditions and to note that all of these traditions emerge out of cultures where they believe in a deep unitive experience, that what you experience, and of course there's no way of proving this, and I'm sure that you as a sort of I don't mean this offensively, materialist, rationalist will say that your inner peace is a contrivance of neurological stuff that's highly personal and just within your personal skin. And I would offer what you experience in that meditative peace is what I experience in that meditative peace. There is a true unity. And from that place, from our shared humanity, the same way as skeletally, you and I are more or less the same, in spite of our superficial cutaneous differences, we can find some archetypal unity to share together, to build upon. Now, I know that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to become experts in building nuclear power stations or whatever particular solution you or I might think we should pursue, but it does mean we might be able to establish a crucible of good intent based on that. Otherwise, what is the point? Personal peace while the world burns.
No. So I think there are two levels, at least two levels, on which we have to address these existential problems, right? And one is the individual level, and the other is the level that you have addressed at various points here of systems and their consequences. And these are fundamentally different, which is to say that no matter how good you get at playing the individual game of untangling your problems and untying your knots, right? Again, you could spend 20 years in a cave and come out, radiantly happy and filled with compassion and just having nothing but good intentions for the world, and yet all you have not done anything that necessarily has much greater significance until you can interface with a system level and make change at that level. And the reason why the systems are so important, and I would argue that the greatest ethical and political changes we're going to make are going to be at the system level, because what we need are systems where the systems that make it easier and easier for ordinary conflicted people to behave better and better, to behave more and more like saints. And what we have are systems very much of the time that are so perversely incentivized that you essentially have to be a saint to behave like a normal human being, right? Take social media. Take something like Twitter, or what used to be known as Twitter. The reason why I left Twitter is I was experiencing it as a space where completely normal people were incentivized to behave like psychopaths. I mean, I would look at my Twitter feed, and I recognized, and it took me way too long to recognize this, but I recognized after some years that I was staring into a funhouse mirror where people were showing me their most grotesque faces. And I just knew there couldn't be that many psychopaths in the world, but I was seeing psychopath after psychopath in my Twitter feed, coming from the left, coming from the right, the most toxically dishonest behavior. It was just gaslighting and insanity. And I recognized that this was having an effect on me. I didn't want to see, I didn't want this false advertisement on an hourly basis to be getting into my head, where I was forming an image of humanity that I actually believe was inaccurate, right? But yet people were behaving terribly in ways that they never would behave in person, right? Because I knew it. The reason why I knew it for sure is that I had met some of these people in person, right? I had dinner with some of these people, and yet they're professionally behaving like psychopaths because of the incentives that Twitter was delivering to them. So my point is, Twitter's a system, among many systems. Social media is a system. And what we need, in this case, we need a system of communication that is making it easier and easier for even normal people to have truly enlightened and enlightening conversations where the wisdom is built into the system layer, right? We have the opposite of that. We have the corruption and the dishonesty and the bad incentives built into the system layer, where you have to be, fucking Gandhi not to be an asshole on Twitter, at least some of the time, right? And so that's, in answer to your question, no matter how good you get at the meditation game privately and personally, no matter how ethical you get privately and personally, society is still going to be at the mercy of bad systems, and we have to play both games. The reason why you play the individual game and commit so much time and attention to that is because it is the closest point of contact to the difference between happiness and suffering in your case. When you wake up in the morning at 4 a.m. and are the prisoner of your thoughts, right? There's no, not only is the system not going to help you, your friends can't even help you. Your family can't help you. You are alone in the privacy of your own mind, right? All of us are in solitary confinement all the time with respect to our own mind. And only a technique of like meditation that allows you to break the spell of your identification with thought can help you there. And that help does play out in how you are in the rest of your life. But again, it's not going to solve our system level problems if millions of us start meditating. It just won't.
Well, there is actually some data to suggest that it will, funded by the David Lynch Foundation in Chicago. And I won't send you those studies because when this ends, I'll bloody well forget this happened. But Sam, now listen, you beautiful man. This is what I'm saying, is perhaps the reason that these esoteric traditions have always existed, from the rishis to the Sufis to the saints, is because they intuit and perhaps even experience that subjectivity can be a portal to a universal experience, that this transcendence of self that gives us relief from the incarceration of the ego, from the enchilade of ever caroming thoughts that become unbearable, ricocheting off the walls of the ego. This can be undone through these practices, perhaps because we access an ulterior power. Curious to me that each tradition has its own version, be it via the mantra or the breath, a way out. The only way out is in. It's curious too that these traditions often accrue moral and ethical principles that find perennial truth. And this perennial truth, on a pragmatic level, Sam, on a pragmatic level, we should believe in this. On a pragmatic level, we should apply the rigor of investigation and the zeal of faith to what we discover in those spaces. Because what you said about that's the only place that can find you peace, where you can find peace and succor, is with a double C-O-U-R, not K-E-R. Peace and succor is in that intimacy. That, semantics aside, is no different from what anyone that believes in God would tell one another. There within you, there is the deep immanence. There is the immanent and transcendent, that peculiar paradox that plays out between waves and particles, plays out within you. There down in the Vedas, we find in poetics that which could never be tracked through materialistic observation, for we do not have the instruments when it comes to the apparently external world. But within, there are solutions. Now, I have to believe that this will map onto reality. But for reality, surely, is a projection of our faith and belief. If it comes to design or culture or music, all things conceived of and constructed in this space that can be a personal hell or a private heaven can be projected out with via the will. You can will yourself to do many things, but you can't will yourself to will. And I feel feel that if personally and individually we endeavor in good faith to find this new resource, this accessible and often ignored latent resource, we can solve precisely the problem that you and I have been talking around. How do we get beyond these silos? How do we overcome this cultural cynicism? How do we get beyond this cavalcade of my experts versus your experts, my flag versus your flag? By acknowledging that we are all an expression of one unitary force. And if we want to neglect that conclusion, then all we are going to do is sit on the fireside of Armageddon and just sort of say, well, I was right, no, I was right. And that doesn't seem like a nice way to go out. I mean, I've got kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, so there's a reason why I resist the religious framing of these transcendent experiences. I do not doubt the importance and the accessibility of the transcendent experiences themselves, because I've had them and I have them, right? So it's patently obvious to me that the ego, as it is generally experienced, is an illusion, right? And on the other side of dispelling that illusion, there's this landscape of mind that is well worth exploring, and meditation is one way to do that. Psychedelics are another way. There's a very interesting conversation to have about how those two projects are related. Mm-hmm. But I would say that we should be slow to make metaphysical assertions about how all of this landscape of experience relates to the cosmos at large. So it's like somebody like Deepak Chopra is very quick to say, okay, this experience of consciousness without ego is what preceded the Big Bang, right? Like he'll just jump into cosmology, right? I see no reason to do that. One, it doesn't seem intellectually honest for me to do that. I mean, there's nothing about this insight into the freedom of consciousness prior to egocentricity. There's nothing about that tells you about quantum mechanics or about cosmology or about the status of the singularity that preceded space-time, right? And it doesn't resolve any of the paradoxes or disputes in any of those specific fields. What it does do is tell you something very direct about what you are subjectively. Like there are objective claims we can make about human subjectivity, right? We can say there's an infinite number of things we can say about the nature of the mind from the first person side, from the side of felt experience, that are not merely subjective, they're actually objective. Like you can make claims about the way the mind is through direct experience. And for instance, you can make a claim about impermanence, right? Every state of mind you've ever had prior to this moment has arisen and passed away, right? You know, the anger you felt 2 weeks ago isn't here anymore, right? And if it comes back in the next moment, that's a newly arising phenomenon, which again will pass away. And it's the connection between the feeling and the thoughts is something that we can inspect from a first person side and make objective claims about, right? So I'm not saying this is all a space where there's no truth. There are very deep truths, first person truths to be discovered here, but they're different truths than the truths of cosmology.
Well, absolutely,
physics.
Of course. But on that point, Sam, they are. Let me offer you this: there are also sort of medical claims about sort of wellness, blood pressure, cardiovascular benefits that could be made that could not possibly have been medically understood by the people that conceived of these techniques, and yet somehow they knew. And I don't think that we can just extract these technologies from their traditions without honoring and acknowledging many of what they declared to be the implications of this technology. Love, particularly when they are such beautiful declarations. Love, beauty, unity. Now, whilst you say that it's fanciful and doubtless conjecture to make cosmological claims on the basis of a personal subjective experience in meditation, it is similarly conjecture to say that there is nothing before the Big Bang. There's exactly the same amount of proof. Yeah. One of them is optimistic, optimistic, one of them is pessimistic. I see as much zeal and devoutness in the realm of materialism, and to some degree, it's been sort of offered many times that, notable and brilliant atheists like yourself and Hitchens and Dawkins, all men that I very much revere and respect, and I know that you know stuff I don't know. But there is certainly a devoutness to the, no, I don't want to call it pessimism because that's unfair and it's pejorative, but the materialism and the rationalism and the insistence that just because because what I offer is this: there are realms and frequencies for which we do not have the instruments, but because we don't have the instruments, that doesn't mean the data isn't there. And even someone, a much more sort of popular and populist in a different sense figure like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Brian Cox, friends of mine in sort of science entertainment, say, stuff like, if it can't be measured, it isn't there, and eventually we will be able to hold this knowledge. But knowledge is limitless. The potential for knowledge is infinite, and we will remain finite. Yet in this space where we transcend the personal self, I believe that we do exactly access a super state of possibilities. And certainly, if you can create a cultural bloody phenomena like Pokemon Go, or bloody or Jesus Christ, the excitement and fanfare around the Super Bowl, you can use this prima materia, this prakriti, to create better cultures, particularly if there's a goodwill about it. And also, I would say that down here in this place, we meet too the archetypes, we meet the perennial, we meet stories, folklore, and dreams, which, while certainly housed within the metaphysical, have enough ubiquity, I would suggest, Sam, to warrant investigation. And even if investigation isn't the right tool, maybe this short, abrupt, yet beautiful word, faith.
Well, so I take a slightly different line through this than the one you expect. I'm not a devout materialist of the sort that you imagine. I just see that there's a third option, which is to acknowledge what you don't know, right? I think we all stand before an ocean of ignorance, and we broadcast across that ocean rather often metaphysical claims that are unwarranted, right? We do science on the seashore, and we explore the ocean with respect to certain physicalist assumptions, but we also, science is bigger than that. Ultimately, if physicalism is limited and it turns out to be untrue or partial or otherwise misleading, there will be a rational accounting of that, of how we wandered into error there, right? It's not irrational to speculate that maybe mind is not what it seems, right? And maybe its dependency on the brain is not what it seems, right? So that all of this is fair game. But to pretend to know any specific thing to be true in this area, I think, is intellectually dishonest.
Yeah.
And specifically, but this is the one piece that is truly seditious with respect to the religious project, and which is the basis of my atheism, is one thing that the jury is no longer out on is the merely human origins of our religious institutions and our religious literature, because they broadcast their provinciality and their merely human origins on every page. You read the Bible and ask yourself, how hard would it have been for an omniscient being to have put in a single page of this text evidence of his omniscience? It would be trivially easy to have done that, and there's not a single passage like that in the Bible. Everything in the Bible could have been written by a first-century human being, or somebody who lived in the 5th century BC or 1000 BC, depending on what book we're talking about. And so it is with every other religious scripture. So what we know is that the foundational claims, certainly of Abrahamic religion, of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the foundational claim that a specific book has a non-human origin, right? That is the claim that gives you Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We know that claim is specious and indefensible at this point in history. And what we need, therefore, is a truly 21st century conversation about everything we've been talking about the possibility of self-transcendence, its implications for running a sane society. How do we get billions of people to solve these coordination problems of cooperation and converge on common projects so as to not make themselves needlessly miserable? All of this is a project that requires a 21st century intellectually honest framing. And so the reason why I dispense with religion to begin that conversation is that all of our religious scriptures are intrinsically at odds with one another. They're mutually incompatible. Their divisiveness is right there on the surface, right? I mean, to take one example, I mean, I see that you're resisting this claim,
but Bible Grinch, you're Bible Grinching, you're Quran Grinching. No, because I would say this.
But if you're going to pander, no, but what?
Come on,
Russell,
you already know
if you're
what
going to pander to the religious, if you're going to pander to the religious biases of traditional religious people, right? If you're going to tell Muslims that they're not wrong to be Muslim and Christians that they're not wrong to be Christian, right? That these are totally valid projects.
I believe that they're
what
right.
you have done is enshrine a zero-sum contest between Muslims and Christians, because Islam and Christianity at their core are incompatible.
Sam.
And I'll tell you why. At their core, Jesus, every Christian, real Christian, asserts that Jesus was divine, and every real Muslim asserts that he wasn't. How do you square that zero-sum contest? You can't.
How I would do this,
honestly,
how I would do this is I would say that your unconscious framing, when you say from a 21st century perspective, enshrines the notion of progressivism, that we're at some current apex now, rather than a temporal gateway, a liminal space where we, like the Hellenists who had to address the peculiar motions of the spheres, were precisely inverse to what they had assumed, like those that preceded Galileo, who had to acknowledge that amidst the devices and new lenses, new realms have been uncovered. We cannot judge the semantic devices by which these models and modalities are interpreted in the same way that we might adjudicate their cultural and social